Welcome, weary traveler, to a journey through the quiet corners of a world where seasons change with gentle certainty and kindness grows like wildflowers in untended meadows. Tonight, we explore the complete tale of Tom Nook, from his humble beginnings as a wide-eyed young raccoon with dreams too big for his small village, to his transformation into the gentle architect of countless communities where strangers become neighbors and neighbors become family. This is a story of friendship and betrayal, of dreams deferred and wisdom earned, of how sometimes the greatest success comes not from what we accumulate but from what we give away. So settle yourself comfortably. Let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of distant waves, and allow yourself to drift into this tale of second chances and quiet triumphs. In the earliest memories that Tom Nook carries within his heart, like pressed flowers between the pages of an old book, there existed a village so small and peaceful that it seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time itself. This was a place where the changing of seasons marked not just the passage of days, but the rhythm of an entire community's heartbeat, where every resident knew not only each other's names, but the stories that had shaped their lives and the dreams they carried like secret treasures. The village nestled in a valley between rolling hills covered with oak and maple trees that turned the most magnificent shades of gold and crimson each autumn, their leaves falling like gentle rain to carpet the narrow paths that connected one modest home to another. A clear stream wound its way through the center of the settlement, its waters so pure that children could drink from cupped hands without a moment's thought, while fish swam in lazy circles beneath bridges built by grandfathers whose own grandfathers had placed each stone with careful attention to both function and beauty. It was here, in a cozy house with windows that caught the morning sun, and a garden where his mother grew vegetables that seemed to taste of sunshine and rain in equal measure, that Tom Nook spent his childhood years learning the fundamental lessons that would shape everything he would become in the decades that followed. His parents were simple folk who measured wealth not in bells accumulated, but in neighbors helped, not in possessions owned, but in kindness given freely to anyone who needed it. His father worked as the village's general handyman, a raccoon whose paws seemed to possess an almost magical ability to fix anything that was broken, from squeaky door hinges to broken hearts. There was no problem too small for his attention, no favor too insignificant to deserve his best effort. Tom would follow him on his rounds through the village, watching with wide eyes as his father repaired a fence here, unclogged a drain there, always refusing payment from those who could least afford it, and accepting only what others could comfortably spare. From these early experiences, Tom learned that work was not something to be endured, but something to be embraced, that the satisfaction of solving problems and helping others was a reward that no amount of bells could purchase. He learned to see potential where others saw only problems, to understand that every broken thing contained within it the possibility of becoming something better than it had been before. His mother tended not only her own garden, but served as the village's unofficial keeper of wisdom, the person that neighbors turned to when they needed advice about everything from which crops to plant to how to mend a quarrel between old friends. She possessed the rare gift of being able to listen, not just to what people said, but to what they meant, to understand the fears and hopes that lived beneath the surface of everyday conversation. Through her example, Tom learned that true intelligence lay not in having all the answers, but in asking the right questions, in creating spaces where others felt safe enough to share their troubles and wise enough to find their own solutions. He watched her mediate disputes with patience that seemed infinite, her voice never rising above the gentle tone one might use to comfort a frightened child, yet carrying an authority that made even the most stubborn villagers pause and reconsider their positions. The village itself was a living lesson in the kind of community that was possible when people chose cooperation over competition, when they understood that individual success meant nothing if it came at the expense of collective well-being. There was old Mr. Tanuki, who ran the general store with prices that seemed to fluctuate based not on market conditions but on his customers' ability to pay, somehow always managing to break even while ensuring that no one went without necessities. There was Mrs. Raccoon, who taught the village children not from textbooks but from the accumulated wisdom of generations. Her lessons taking place as often in the forest or by the stream as in any formal classroom. Her curriculum, including everything from mathematics and reading to the proper way to treat the natural world and the importance of keeping promises even when no one was watching. The village blacksmith, a gruff old badger whose bark was far worse than his bite, created tools that lasted for generations and refused to retire even though his apprentice had long since mastered every technique he could teach. The village seamstress mended not only clothes but relationships. Her shop, serving as an informal gathering place where gossip was transformed into genuine concern for neighbors, and idle chatter became the foundation for lasting friendships. It was into this environment of gentle industry and mutual support that Tom Nook's natural entrepreneurial instincts first began to manifest. Even as a young kid, he showed an unusual talent for recognizing what others needed before they realized it themselves, for finding creative solutions to problems that seemed intractable, for bringing together resources and people in ways that benefited everyone involved. When the village's annual festival was threatened by a shortage of decorations, 8-year-old Tom organized the other children to collect autumn leaves and arrange them into garlands that were more beautiful than anything money could have bought. When old Mrs. Hedgehog's arthritis made it difficult for her to tend her garden, Tom established a system where the village children would take turns helping her in exchange for the stories she told about the old days, creating an exchange that enriched everyone involved. His projects were never motivated by a desire for personal gain, but by a genuine wish to see problems solved and communities strengthened. When he organized a group of his friends to collect and sell wild berries, he insisted that the profits be shared equally among all participants, with a portion set aside to buy seeds for next year's village garden. When he started a small business repairing toys for the younger children, he charged prices based not on the complexity of the work but on what each family could afford, often accepting payment in the form of help with chores, or simply the satisfaction of seeing a beloved toy restored to working condition. These early ventures taught Tom lessons that no formal education could have provided. He learned that sustainable success came not from maximizing short-term profits but from building relationships that would endure across years and decades. He discovered that the most valuable currency was not bells but trust. That once lost, such trust could take a lifetime to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. Yet even in this peaceful paradise, Tom's eyes were increasingly drawn toward the horizon, toward the distant city whose lights could sometimes be glimpsed on clear nights from the hilltops surrounding his village. The stories that occasionally reached them of the wider world beyond their valley spoke of opportunities and adventures that seemed to call to something deep within his soul, a restless energy that his quiet village life, however beloved, could not fully satisfy. The catalyst for change came in the form of his friendship with Red, a young fox who arrived in the village one autumn day with a traveling merchant caravan that brought exotic goods and even more exotic tales from the great cities beyond the mountains. Where the village children were content with simple pleasures and familiar routines, Red burned with an ambition that seemed to illuminate everything around him like a brilliant but dangerous flame. Red spoke of the city as if it were a place where dreams took physical form, where clever individuals with the courage to take risks could achieve anything they set their minds to, where the boundaries that confined small-town life simply did not exist. He painted pictures with his words of gleaming buildings that reached toward the sky, of markets where goods from across the world changed hands, of opportunities for advancement that were limited only by one's imagination and determination. The friendship that developed between Tom and Red during that brief autumn visit was intense and immediate, the kind of connection that sometimes springs up between young people who recognize in each other a kindred spirit, a shared hunger for something greater than what their current circumstances provide. They spent long hours walking through the village and the surrounding hills, their conversations ranging across every topic imaginable, as they discovered the many ways their minds seemed to work in harmony. Red's stories of city life were filled with details that made Tom's heart race with excitement and possibility. He spoke of businesses that served hundreds of customers each day, of innovations that changed the way people lived and worked, of fortunes made and lost on the strength of a good idea and the courage to pursue it. Yet beneath the glamour and excitement, there was also a note of something harder and more challenging, a sense that the city demanded sacrifices that small-town life never required. When the caravan departed with the first snows of winter, Red promised to return the following year, and Tom counted the days until that reunion, with an eagerness that surprised even himself. The village that had once seemed like the entire world now felt small and confining, its familiar routines and gentle pace no longer enough to satisfy the restless energy that Red's visit had awakened within him. Throughout that long winter, Tom found himself spending more and more time alone, walking the snow-covered paths of his childhood, while his mind raced with plans and possibilities that had never occurred to him before. He began to see his village not just as home, but as a starting point, a place where he had learned fundamental lessons about kindness and community that would serve him well in whatever larger adventures lay ahead. His parents watched this transformation with the mixture of pride and concern that comes to all parents when they realize their child has outgrown the world they can provide. They recognized the signs of a young person ready to leave the nest, to test their wings in wider skies. Yet they also understood the dangers that lay beyond the safety of their small community. When spring arrived and brought with it news that Red's caravan would indeed return, Tom began making his preparations for departure with a mixture of excitement and trepidation that kept him awake long into the night. He was leaving behind everything he had ever known, everyone who had shaped his understanding of the world, to pursue dreams that existed more in his imagination than in any concrete reality. His final weeks in the village were filled with goodbye visits to every person and place that had played a role in his upbringing. He spent long afternoons with his parents, absorbing their final pieces of advice and wisdom, committing to memory the sound of their voices and the feeling of their embraces. He walked every path in the village one last time, said farewell to the stream where he had played as a child, collected a small bag of soil from his mother's garden to carry with him as a reminder of where he had come from. The morning of his departure was crisp and clear, with the kind of golden light that seemed to bless new beginnings while simultaneously making everything familiar seem precious and irreplaceable. The entire village turned out to see him off, their faces reflecting the same mixture of excitement and concern that had kept his parents awake during the previous weeks. As the caravan rolled away from the only home he had ever known, Tom watched through tear-blurred eyes as the familiar landmarks of his childhood gradually disappeared behind the rolling hills that had defined the boundaries of his world. Yet even as his heart ached with the pain of leaving, it also soared with anticipation for the adventures that lay ahead, the challenges he would face, the person he would become in the great wide world that beckoned beyond the horizon. The young raccoon who rode away from that peaceful village carried within him all the lessons his community had taught him about kindness and cooperation, about the importance of treating others with respect and dignity, regardless of their station in life, about finding satisfaction in work, well done, and problems thoughtfully solved. These values, planted deep in the soil of his character during those formative years, would survive every trial and tribulation that lay ahead, would grow and flourish, even in environments that seemed hostile to such gentle wisdom. Yet Tom also carried with him the dreams and ambitions that his friendship with Red had awakened, the hunger for achievement and recognition that had made his peaceful village life seem insufficient to his expanding sense of possibility. The tension between these two aspects of his nature, the community-minded values of his upbringing and the individual ambition of his dreams, would define every major decision he would make in the years to come, would shape him into the unique individual he was destined to become. As the caravan crested the hill that marked the final boundary of his childhood territory, Tom Nook took one last look back at the village that had given him everything he needed to succeed in the wider world, even if he did not yet understand the full value of those gifts. Then he turned his face toward the future, toward the city lights that promised adventure and opportunity, toward the destiny that awaited a young raccoon with big dreams and an even bigger heart. The journey ahead would test every value his village had taught him, would challenge his understanding of success and failure, friendship and betrayal, would ultimately lead him to discoveries about himself and the world that he could never have imagined during those innocent childhood years. Yet the foundation laid in that small village among the hills would prove unshakable, would provide the solid ground upon which he could build not just a career, but a life of meaning and purpose that would touch countless other lives in ways both profound and subtle. The boy who left his village that bright spring morning would return someday as a man transformed by experience yet unchanged in the values that mattered most, carrying with him the wisdom to build new communities that captured the best of what he had learned in both his childhood home and the wider world beyond its borders. The city that greeted Tom Nook when he finally arrived after weeks of travel with Red's caravan was a marvel of sights and sounds and sensations that overwhelmed every sense he possessed, a sprawling testament to what could be accomplished when thousands of minds and hearts worked together toward the common goal of creating something greater than the sum of its individual parts. Yet for all its magnificence, for all the wonders that met his eyes at every turn, there was also something in the very air itself that felt different from the gentle rhythms of village life. Something harder and more demanding that seemed to strip away the comfortable certainties he had carried with him from his childhood home. The buildings rose toward the sky like geometric mountains, their surfaces gleaming with glass and metal that caught and reflected the light in patterns that shifted throughout the day like some vast, ever-changing kaleidoscope. The streets teemed with creatures of every description, their voices creating a constant background hum of conversation and commerce, negotiation and debate, dreams being pursued and deals being struck with an intensity that never seemed to pause for rest or reflection. In those first overwhelming days, Tom felt like a country mouse who had wandered into a palace, his simple clothes and wide-eyed wonder marking him immediately as someone who did not belong in this sophisticated world of urban complexity. The pace of life moved at speeds that left him breathless. Conversations filled with references he did not understand, business practices that seemed to operate according to rules no one had bothered to explain to someone of his limited experience. Yet Red moved through this urban maze with the confidence of someone who had been born to it. His fox ears always attuned to the whispered opportunities that floated through the air like seeds on the wind, his sharp eyes constantly evaluating every person and situation for potential advantage. He had connections everywhere, it seemed, friends and associates who greeted him with the kind of enthusiastic warmth that spoke of mutually beneficial relationships built on shared understanding of how the city's complex systems really worked. The apartment they shared was modest by city standards, but luxurious beyond anything Tom had ever experienced. With hot water that flowed at the turn of a handle and electric lights that banished darkness at the flip of a switch. From their window on the 15th floor, they could see across the entire downtown district, a sprawling landscape of opportunity that stretched to the horizon, like an ocean of possibility waiting to be explored. Red wasted no time in introducing Tom to the fundamentals of urban entrepreneurship. Though the lessons bore little resemblance to the gentle commerce Tom had practiced in his village. Here, success was measured not by the satisfaction of customers or the strengthening of community bonds, but by the accumulation of bells, the expansion of market share, the ability to outmaneuver competitors in an endless game where the rules seemed to change as quickly as the fashions that swept through the city's trendy districts. Their first venture together was a small art-dealing business, buying paintings and sculptures from struggling artists at prices that barely covered the cost of materials, then selling them to wealthy collectors at markups that would have seemed unconscionable to Tom's village-trained sensibilities. Red explained that this was simply how the art market worked, that the artists were grateful for any income at all, that the collectors were happy to pay premium prices for pieces that might someday become valuable investments. The logic seemed sound enough, yet something about the arrangement troubled Tom in ways he could not quite articulate. He watched the faces of the artists when they sold their work, saw the mixture of relief and resignation in their eyes, the way they clutched the modest payments as if they represented not just money, but survival itself. He observed the collectors as well, noting how they spoke of beauty and artistic vision, while their primary concerns seemed to focus on potential returns on investment and the impression their acquisitions would make on their social circles. As weeks turned into months, Tom found himself becoming increasingly skilled at the various aspects of their business, his natural talent for reading people and understanding their needs serving him well in negotiations and sales presentations. He learned to speak the language of the art world, to discuss brushwork and composition with the same fluency he had once used to talk about crop rotations and weather patterns. He developed relationships with artists and collectors alike, becoming known as someone who could be trusted to deliver quality pieces at fair prices. Yet, even as his reputation and income grew, Tom could not shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing from this new life he was building. The transactions that filled his days felt hollow compared to the meaningful exchanges he had facilitated in his village, where every deal had strengthened the bonds between neighbors and contributed to the overall well-being of the community. Here, success seemed to require a kind of emotional distance that felt unnatural to his inherently social nature, a willingness to view other people primarily as sources of profit rather than as individuals deserving of genuine care and consideration. Red, meanwhile, thrived in this environment, like a fish returning to water after a long sojourn on dry land. His natural charisma and quick wit made him popular at the gallery openings and collector parties that formed the social backbone of their industry, while his keen eye for emerging trends allowed them to identify promising artists before their work became widely recognized. He seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of the city's complex social hierarchies, knowing exactly how to approach each potential client in the way most likely to result in a successful sale. The partnership between them was undeniably successful from a purely financial perspective, their combined skills allowing them to build a client base and reputation that would have taken either of them much longer to achieve working alone. Tom's genuine appreciation for artistic beauty and his talent for explaining the emotional impact of different pieces complemented Red's market savvy and natural salesmanship, creating a synergy that impressed even their most experienced competitors. Yet as their business grew and their profits increased, Tom began to notice subtle changes in his friend's behavior that troubled him more than he cared to admit. Red's enthusiasm for their work seemed to be shifting from genuine appreciation for art and artists to a more calculating focus on market manipulation and profit maximization. He began to speak dismissively of artists who refused to modify their work to match current trends, to suggest strategies that bordered on deception when dealing with less sophisticated clients. The first serious crack in Tom's faith in their partnership came when he discovered that Red had been selling reproduction paintings as original works to collectors who lacked the expertise to detect the difference. When confronted, Red laughed off Tom's concerns, explaining that the buyers were getting exactly what they wanted, beautiful art that impressed their friends, and that the specific question of authenticity was merely a technicality that added nothing to anyone's actual enjoyment of the pieces. The argument that followed revealed fundamental differences in their understanding of business ethics that had been masked by their early success and the excitement of building something together. Tom insisted that honesty was not just a moral imperative, but a practical necessity for building the kind of long-term relationships that would sustain their business through inevitable market fluctuations. Red countered that Tom's village morality was naive and impractical in the competitive urban environment, that everyone in the art world engaged in similar practices, that their clients were sophisticated enough to know the risks they were taking when they chose to trust dealers they had not thoroughly vetted. The compromise they reached felt unsatisfying to both of them, agreement to be more transparent about the provenance of their pieces while still maintaining the flexibility to present their inventory in the most favorable possible light. Yet even this middle ground proved unstable, as Tom found himself constantly questioning whether their sales practices met his personal standards of honesty, while Red grew increasingly impatient with what he saw as unnecessary constraints on their profit potential. The tension between them might have remained manageable if not for the arrival of an opportunity that would test their partnership beyond its breaking point. A wealthy collector approached them with an offer to purchase an entire estate collection of rare paintings, sculptures, and antique furniture, the kind of major transaction that could establish their reputation and financial security for years to come. The catch was that the deal required them to provide authentication certificates for pieces whose true origins were questionable at best, to vouch for the legitimacy of works that had passed through enough hands and unclear transactions that their actual provenance had become impossible to verify. Red saw the opportunity as the breakthrough they had been working toward, the chance to move from small-scale dealing into the upper echelons of the art market where the real money and prestige were concentrated. He argued that their reputation for quality and reliability made their authentication as valuable as any official certificate, that their clients trusted their judgment enough that formal documentation was merely a bureaucratic formality. Tom understood the business logic, but could not reconcile the ethical implications with his fundamental beliefs about honesty and trust. The idea of signing his name to certificates attesting to facts he could not verify felt like a betrayal, not just of their clients, but of himself, of the values his parents and village had instilled in him during his formative years. He proposed alternative approaches that would allow them to sell the collection while being transparent about the limitations of their knowledge regarding each piece's history. The debates that raged between them over several sleepless nights revealed the full extent of how differently they had come to view their work and their responsibilities to the people who trusted them with their business. For Red, the art world was fundamentally a game where success belonged to those clever and bold enough to exploit every available advantage, where formal rules were suggestions to be circumvented, rather than principles to be upheld. For Tom, Their work represented an extension of the community-building values he had learned in his village, where trust once broken could never be fully repaired, and where short-term gains achieved through deception inevitably led to long-term losses that affected everyone involved. When Red finally decided to proceed with the estate deal, despite Tom's objections, forging the authentication certificates himself and presenting them to their client as the joint work of their partnership, Tom felt something fundamental break within their relationship that no amount of success or profit could repair. The betrayal was not just professional but deeply personal, a violation of the trust and mutual respect that had made their friendship possible in the first place. The immediate aftermath of the estate sale was everything Red had promised. It would be a flood of new clients seeking their services, invitations to exclusive events where million-bell transactions were conducted with casual ease, recognition as rising stars in the city's competitive art market. Yet Tom found himself unable to enjoy any of these fruits of their success, knowing that they had been obtained through methods that violated every principle his upbringing had taught him about how business relationships should be conducted. The final confrontation between them took place on a rainy evening in their shared office, the sound of water against the windows providing a melancholy soundtrack to words that would end their partnership and friendship forever. Tom accused Red of caring more about profit than people, of losing sight of the human cost of their success, of becoming exactly the kind of person their village neighbors would have warned them about during their childhood. Red responded that Tom had failed to adapt to the realities of city life, that his rigid morality was holding back their potential for success, that anyone too naive to understand how the business world actually operated had no place in it. The legal dissolution of their partnership was handled with professional efficiency that masked the emotional devastation both of them felt at the ending of what had once seemed like an unbreakable bond. Tom's share of their accumulated assets was substantial enough to provide him with financial security for years to come, yet it felt like payment for the death of something precious that could never be replaced or reconstructed. The months that followed were among the darkest in Tom's life, as he struggled to find meaning and direction in a city that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Despite his years of residence there, the art world that had once seemed full of possibility now appeared tainted by the memory of his partnership with Red, every gallery opening and collector party serving as a reminder of relationships built on foundations of sand rather than stone. He attempted to continue in the art business on his own, using his accumulated contacts and reputation to build a new practice based on the principles of absolute honesty and transparency that he felt had been compromised in his work with Red. Yet he discovered that his ethical standards placed him at a severe disadvantage in a marketplace where bending the truth was considered a normal part of doing business, where clients often preferred comfortable illusions to uncomfortable realities. The isolation that characterized this period of his life was particularly painful for someone whose nature craved community and connection, whose happiest memories involved collaborative efforts to solve problems and create value for others. The city that had once seemed full of potential friends and allies now felt like a landscape of strangers who viewed every interaction through the lens of potential advantage, who measured relationships by their utility rather than their intrinsic value. Tom's attempts to recreate the sense of community he had known in his village met with limited success in an environment where most people were too busy pursuing their own ambitions to invest deeply in the welfare of their neighbors. The urban lifestyle that had once seemed so sophisticated now appeared hollow and unsatisfying, its emphasis on individual achievement coming at the cost of the collective well-being that he had always believed was the foundation of any healthy society. The revelation that would ultimately lead to his departure from the city came when he learned through mutual acquaintances that several of the authentication certificates Red had forged for the estate sale had been exposed as fraudulent, resulting in lawsuits and criminal investigations that threatened to destroy the reputations of everyone associated with the transaction. The collectors who had trusted their partnership were facing significant financial losses, while the artists whose work had been misrepresented were struggling to restore their damaged credibility in an industry where reputation was everything. The guilt Tom felt upon learning of these consequences was overwhelming. Even though he had played no direct role in creating the fraudulent documents and had argued against the entire enterprise from the beginning, he understood that his association with Red and their shared business history made him partially responsible in the eyes of many people, that his reputation would be forever linked to practices he had opposed but failed to prevent. Yet, even more devastating than the damage to his professional standing was the realization that his youthful dreams of urban success had been built on fundamentally flawed assumptions about what such success would require and what it would ultimately provide. The city had offered him opportunities for financial advancement and social recognition that his small village could never have matched, but it had demanded in return a willingness to compromise his core values in ways that left him feeling like a stranger to himself. The decision to leave the city was not made suddenly, but emerged gradually from months of sleepless nights and long walks through streets that no longer felt like home. Tom realized that he had been trying to force himself to thrive in an environment that was fundamentally incompatible with his nature, that valued individual cunning over collective wisdom, competition over cooperation, the accumulation of wealth over the building of relationships. The letter he wrote to his parents informing them of his intention to return home was one of the most difficult things he had ever written, requiring him to admit that the grand adventure they had supported with such pride and concern had ended not in triumph, but in disillusionment and defeat. Yet their response, when it came, was filled with the kind of unconditional love and acceptance that reminded him why he had been so eager to leave their influence, and why he was now so grateful to have it waiting for his return. The final weeks Tom spent in the city were devoted to closing out his business affairs and saying goodbye to the few genuine friendships he had managed to build despite the competitive environment. These farewells were bittersweet, tinged with the recognition that he was leaving behind not just a place, but a version of himself that had been shaped by urban experiences, both positive and negative. As the train carried him away from the city lights toward the rural landscapes of his childhood, Tom watched the urban skyline fade into the distance with emotions that were far more complex than simple relief or regret. He had failed to achieve the conventional success he had once dreamed of, had discovered that his partnership with his closest friend could not survive the ethical challenges of their chosen profession, had learned painful lessons about the difference between cleverness and wisdom, between individual advancement and genuine fulfillment. Yet he was also returning home with a deeper understanding of his own values and priorities, with hard-won knowledge about the kind of life he wanted to build, and the principles he was unwilling to compromise regardless of the potential cost. The young raccoon who had left his village with dreams of urban conquest was being replaced by a wiser individual who understood that true success could not be measured in bells accumulated or status achieved, but only in lives improved and communities strengthened. The train journey that carried him back to his village was also a journey back to himself, to the fundamental values and perspectives that had been shaped during his earliest years and had survived every trial and temptation the city had offered. He was older now, scarred by experiences that had tested his character in ways his sheltered childhood could never have prepared him for, but also more certain than ever about what kind of person he wanted to be and what kind of work he wanted to do with the years that lay ahead. As the familiar landscape of his childhood began to appear outside the train windows, Tom Nook felt something that had been missing during his city years, finally beginning to return to his heart, a sense of purpose that was aligned with his deepest values, a vision of the future that honored both his dreams of making a difference in the world and his understanding of what such difference-making would actually require. The prodigal son was coming home, not in triumph but in wisdom, carrying with him lessons that could only have been learned through failure and loss, through the kind of deep disappointment that strips away illusions and reveals the bedrock truths upon which a meaningful life can be built. The village that welcomed Tom Nook home after his years of urban exile was both exactly as he had left it and subtly transformed by the passage of time, like a beloved melody, played in a slightly different key that retained all its essential beauty while carrying new depths of meaning that only experience could reveal. The same narrow paths wound between the same modest houses. The same clear stream carried the same pure water, past the same carefully tended bridges. Yet Tom's eyes, now educated by exposure to the harsh realities of city life, could see layers of wisdom and intentionality in this simple community that he had been too young to appreciate during his childhood. His parents greeted his return with the kind of quiet joy that spoke of prayers answered and fears finally laid to rest, their faces showing both relief at having their son safely home and the subtle marks of worry that had accumulated during the years of his absence. They asked no probing questions about the circumstances that had brought him back, understanding instinctively that some wounds needed time to heal before they could be discussed, that the young man who stood in their doorway carried burdens that could only be shared when he felt ready to set them down. The house of his childhood felt simultaneously smaller and more precious than his memories had painted it, its familiar rooms and well-worn furniture offering a kind of comfort that no amount of urban sophistication could provide. His old bedroom, carefully maintained by his mother despite the years of his absence, welcomed him like an embrace from his former self, its simple furnishings and childhood mementos serving as anchors to an identity that city life had nearly succeeded in erasing. In those first weeks of readjustment, Tom found himself walking the village paths with the desperate hunger of someone who had nearly died of thirst and was finally able to drink deeply from the well of genuine community. Every familiar face carried memories of kindness freely given. Every casual conversation reminded him of what it felt like to interact with people who valued him for who he was, rather than what he might be able to provide them. Every simple transaction in the village store demonstrated principles of fairness and mutual consideration that stood in stark contrast to the calculating exchanges that had defined his urban business dealings. Yet the peace of homecoming was complicated by an undercurrent of restlessness that Tom could not entirely suppress, an awareness that while he had fled from one unsuitable environment, he had not yet discovered what would truly allow his talents and ambitions to flourish. The village that had nurtured his childhood could provide healing and perspective, but it could not offer the kind of meaningful work that would transform his hard-won wisdom into practical benefit for others. The turning point came during a conversation with old Mrs. Hedgehog, the village storyteller whose garden he had helped tend as a child and whose arthritis had grown more pronounced during his years away. She spoke of the difficulties that many villagers faced in obtaining basic necessities, not from any shortage of bells or resources, but from the simple logistical challenges of a small community that lacked convenient access to diverse goods and services. The nearest town with a proper shopping district was a half-day's journey by cart, a distance that made casual shopping trips impractical for most villagers and created genuine hardship for those whose mobility was limited by age or infirmity. Essential items that city dwellers took for granted, quality tools, clothing suitable for different seasons, books and educational materials, even basic medicines, were often difficult to obtain without planning expeditions that consumed entire days and required physical stamina that not everyone possessed. As Mrs. Hedgehog described these challenges with the matter-of-fact acceptance that characterized her approach to most of life's difficulties, Tom felt something stir within him that had been dormant since his return from the city. Here was a genuine problem that affected people he cared about, a situation where his business skills and urban experience could be applied in service of community welfare rather than individual profit maximization. The idea that began to take shape in his mind was deceptively simple: a small general store that would bring the conveniences of town shopping to his village, carefully curated to meet the specific needs of his neighbors, while operating according to principles that prioritized community service over profit margins. It would be the kind of business his village upbringing had prepared him to run, informed by the hard lessons his city experience had taught him about both the opportunities and the pitfalls that awaited any entrepreneur. The location he chose for this venture was a small building that had once housed the village's original general store, closed years earlier when its elderly proprietor had retired without finding a suitable successor. The structure required extensive renovation to make it suitable for modern retail operations, but its central location and familiar role in village life made it the perfect foundation for Tom's vision of what community commerce could become. The months of preparation that followed were among the most satisfying of Tom's life, as he threw himself into the work of transforming the abandoned building into something that would serve his neighbors' needs, while reflecting his own hard-won understanding of what business could be when it was conducted with integrity and genuine care for customer welfare. Every decision, from the arrangement of shelving to the selection of initial inventory, was made with careful consideration of how it would affect the daily lives of the people he had grown up with and now hoped to serve. The renovation work itself became a community effort that reminded Tom of the collaborative spirit he had witnessed during his childhood, but had never fully understood until his urban experiences had shown him how rare such cooperation actually was. Neighbors appeared without invitation to help with painting and cleaning, offering their labor not in expectation of payment, but from the simple recognition that Tom's project would benefit everyone in the village. His father provided expertise in carpentry and repairs, his practiced hands solving problems that would have required expensive professional help in the city. His mother contributed her knowledge of village needs and preferences, helping Tom understand which products would be most appreciated and which could be safely omitted from his initial inventory. Even the children offered their assistance, sweeping floors and organizing supplies with the enthusiasm that comes from being included in important adult activities. The grand opening of Nook's Cranny was celebrated with the kind of festival atmosphere that the village reserved for its most significant occasions, the entire community gathering to witness the rebirth of an institution that had been sorely missed during its years of absence. Yet the true test of Tom's vision would come not in the excitement of that first day, but in the quiet daily interactions that would determine whether his store could truly serve the role he envisioned for it in the life of his community. The business philosophy that guided Tom's operation of Nook's Cranny was revolutionary in its simplicity. Treat every customer as a neighbor, deserving of respect and consideration. Price goods fairly based on their actual value rather than what the market would bear, and measure success not by profit margins, but by the extent to which the store contributed to the overall well-being of the community it served. This approach manifested in countless small ways that distinguished Nook's Cranny from typical retail operations. Tom made a point of learning not just the names of his customers, but the details of their lives, their particular needs and preferences, their financial circumstances and family situations. He adjusted his inventory based not on profit potential, but on genuine community need, stocking items that might sell slowly but served essential purposes for specific individuals. When Mrs. Badger needed a particular type of yarn for a project that would provide winter clothing for her grandchildren, Tom special ordered it despite knowing that the remaining skeins might sit on his shelves for months before finding other buyers. When young Billy Goat was saving bells for a fishing rod that would allow him to contribute to his family's dinner table, Tom held the item aside and created a payment plan that allowed the boy to contribute small amounts each week until he had earned enough to complete the purchase. The pricing structure at Nook's Cranny reflected Tom's understanding that a store serving a small community had responsibilities that transcended simple profit maximization. Essential items were priced at cost or with minimal markup, ensuring that no family would go without necessities due to financial constraints. Luxury items carried higher margins that helped subsidize the essential goods, creating a system where those who could afford to pay more effectively supported those whose resources were more limited. This approach to pricing required Tom to develop a sophisticated understanding of his community's economic ecosystem, to recognize which customers could comfortably afford full retail prices and which needed more consideration. He learned to offer discounts and payment plans with the kind of discretion that preserved dignity while providing genuine assistance, to frame such arrangements as business partnerships rather than charity. The seasonal rhythms of village life created their own challenges and opportunities for Nook's Cranny, as Tom learned to anticipate the cyclical needs of a community whose livelihood was closely tied to agricultural patterns and natural cycles. Spring brought demand for gardening supplies and tools. Summer required items for outdoor work and recreation. Autumn meant preparation for winter's isolation, and winter itself created needs for warm clothing and indoor activities. Tom's city experience proved invaluable in managing these seasonal fluctuations, as he had learned the importance of careful inventory planning and the dangers of either overstocking or understocking during critical periods. His relationships with urban suppliers allowed him to obtain goods at prices that would have been impossible for a typical small-town merchant, while his growing understanding of village needs enabled him to order precisely what would be most useful rather than settling for generic selections. Yet the greatest challenge Tom faced in operating Nook's Cranny was not logistical or financial, but emotional, as he struggled to overcome the trust issues and cynicism that his partnership with Red had left embedded in his character like splinters that worked their way to the surface at unexpected moments. The betrayal he had experienced in the city had taught him to question every relationship, to look for hidden motives behind every friendly gesture, to assume that self-interest lurked beneath even the most apparently altruistic behavior. This defensive wariness served him poorly in a community where genuine kindness was the norm rather than the exception, where his neighbors' expressions of gratitude and offers of friendship were exactly what they appeared to be, rather than calculated attempts to gain advantage. Learning to accept such gestures at face value, to trust again in the possibility of relationships based on mutual respect rather than mutual exploitation, became one of the most important aspects of Tom's healing process. The loneliness that had characterized his final months in the city persisted during his early months back in the village, not because he lacked opportunities for social connection, but because the wounds left by his broken friendship with Red made him reluctant to open himself to the vulnerability that true friendship required. He found himself maintaining cordial but somewhat distant relationships with his customers and neighbors, protecting himself from potential hurt by avoiding the kind of deep emotional investment that had made his eventual betrayal so devastating. This emotional guardedness affected every aspect of his life, from his business relationships to his interactions with his own family, creating a barrier that he recognized as both necessary for his psychological protection and harmful to his long-term well-being. The community that had welcomed him home with such warmth deserved better than a shopkeeper who served them efficiently but kept them at arm's length. Yet Tom found himself unable to simply will away the caution that his urban experiences had taught him to regard as essential for survival. The breakthrough that began to dissolve this protective shell came through his relationship with Mr. Tortimer, the village elder whose wisdom and patience had guided the community through countless challenges over the decades. The old turtle had watched Tom's return and subsequent struggles with the kind of understanding that comes from having lived long enough to see how life's hardest lessons are learned, and he began making regular visits to Nook's cranny that gradually evolved from simple shopping trips into informal counseling sessions. Mr. Tortimer possessed the rare gift of being able to listen without judgment and offer guidance without preaching, his questions and observations helping Tom to recognize patterns in his own behavior and thinking that he had been too close to see clearly. Through their conversations, Tom began to understand that his wariness of others was actually a reflection of his own damaged sense of self-worth, that his fear of being betrayed again was rooted in a belief that he somehow deserved the treatment he had received from Red. The process of rebuilding his capacity for trust was slow and sometimes painful, requiring Tom to consciously choose vulnerability, even when every instinct urged him towards self-protection. He began to share more of himself with his customers, to accept their invitations to social gatherings, to offer help with their problems, not just as a business owner seeking to build customer loyalty, but as a neighbor who genuinely cared about their welfare. The transformation was gradual but undeniable, as Tom's growing willingness to engage authentically with his community began to create the kind of relationships that had made his childhood village feel like the center of the universe. Customers became friends, business transactions evolved into genuine conversations, and the store that had begun as a practical solution to community needs became a social hub where villagers gathered to share news, seek advice, and simply enjoy each other's company. The success of Nook's Cranny, measured by the standards Tom had learned to value most highly, became apparent not in its financial performance, but in its integration into the daily life of the village. Children stopped by after school to spend their allowance bells on small treasures, their excitement and careful deliberation reminding Tom of his own childhood shopping expeditions. Adults used the store as a meeting place, conducting informal business and planning community projects while browsing the shelves or waiting for custom orders to arrive. The elderly villagers, many of whom had mobility limitations that made travel to the distant town difficult, expressed gratitude that went far beyond simple appreciation for convenient shopping. For them, Nook's Cranny represented independence and dignity, the ability to obtain necessities without depending on family members or neighbors for transportation, the freedom to make purchasing decisions based on their own preferences rather than the convenience of others. As the seasons turned and his store became an established part of village life, Tom found himself developing a new understanding of what success actually meant, a definition that bore little resemblance to the urban metrics of profit margins and market share that had once seemed so important. True success, he realized, lay in the extent to which his work contributed to the flourishing of the community he served, in the relationships he built with his neighbors, in the satisfaction of solving problems and meeting needs that others might have overlooked or dismissed as unprofitable. The philosophy that emerged from this understanding would guide every decision Tom made for the rest of his career, a simple principle that nonetheless represented a radical departure from conventional business wisdom: service before profit, community before individual gain, long-term relationships before short-term advantages. It was a philosophy born from the ashes of his urban disappointments and nurtured by the patient wisdom of a village that had never forgotten what truly mattered. The young raccoon who had once dreamed of urban conquest had become something far more valuable and rare, a businessman who understood that the highest form of success lay not in what he could extract from his community, but in what he could contribute to it, not in the accumulation of wealth, but in the creation of value that enriched the lives of everyone around him. The transformation that would define the next chapter of Tom Nook's life began not with grand plans or ambitious schemes, but with a simple act of compassion on a rain-soaked autumn evening when the warmth of Nook's cranny provided shelter not just from the weather, but from circumstances far more harsh and unforgiving than any storm. Two young raccoon kits, their clothes sodden and their eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from having nowhere safe to go, appeared at his door like refugees from a world that had proven itself indifferent to their welfare. Timmy and Tommy, as they would eventually introduce themselves in voices barely above whispers, could not have been more than 8 or 9 years old, yet their faces already carried the premature wisdom that comes to children who have learned too early that adults cannot always be trusted to provide the protection and care that should be every young soul's birthright. They clutched a few meager possessions in their small paws, their entire worldly wealth consisting of a handful of bells, some worn clothing, and a tattered photograph that they guarded as if it contained the secrets of the universe. The story that emerged over the following days, shared in fragments between long silences and carefully prepared meals, painted a picture of abandonment and neglect that stirred something protective and paternal in Tom's heart that he had not known existed until that moment. The Kits had been living with a distant relative whose interest in their welfare had diminished as quickly as the modest inheritance their parents had left for their care, leaving them to fend for themselves in circumstances that would have challenged adults with far more resources and experience. Tom's decision to take them in was made not from careful deliberation, but from the instinctive recognition that these children needed exactly the kind of stable, nurturing environment that his village upbringing had taught him to value above all other considerations. The guest bedroom above Nook's cranny, which had served primarily as storage space for seasonal inventory, was quickly transformed into a haven where two frightened young souls could begin to believe again in the possibility of safety and belonging. The legal formalities of guardianship were handled with the same quiet efficiency that characterized most village business, the community's informal network of relationships proving far more effective than any bureaucratic system could have been in ensuring that the Kits' needs were met and their future secured. Mr. Tortimer's connections with regional authorities smoothed the official processes, while the village as a whole embraced the newcomers with the kind of unquestioned acceptance that made formal adoption procedures seem like mere paperwork confirming what everyone already knew to be true. Yet the practical challenges of suddenly becoming responsible for two traumatized children, while simultaneously operating a business that served the entire community, tested every aspect of Tom's character and capabilities in ways that no previous experience had prepared him to handle. The Kits required not just food and shelter, but the kind of patient, consistent care that could gradually heal the emotional wounds their abandonment had inflicted, while Nook's cranny continued to demand the attention and energy necessary to serve its role as the village's commercial and social center. The solution that emerged reflected the same collaborative spirit that had characterized Tom's reintegration into village life, as neighbors and customers naturally began to share in the work of caring for Timmy and Tommy in ways that transformed their guardianship from an individual responsibility into a community effort. Mrs. Hedgehog appointed herself their unofficial grandmother, teaching them traditional stories and games during quiet afternoons when Tom was occupied with store business. Mr. Badger showed them how to identify edible plants and track animal signs, skills that connected them to the natural world that surrounded their new home. The village teacher, a wise old owl whose classroom had served multiple generations of local children, welcomed the kits with the understanding that their education needed to address not just academic subjects, but the social and emotional development that their traumatic experiences had interrupted. Their lessons were carefully calibrated to rebuild their confidence while challenging them appropriately, creating a learning environment where past failures could be transformed into future strengths. For Tom, the experience of becoming a surrogate father while continuing to operate his business created a new understanding of what it meant to balance personal and professional responsibilities in ways that honored both without sacrificing either. The store's hours became more flexible, its operations more family-friendly, as he learned to integrate childcare with commerce in ways that actually enhanced both experiences. The Kits proved to be naturally curious about the business that had become their home, their questions about inventory management and customer service revealing minds that were both quick to learn and eager to contribute. Tom began to include them in simple tasks, appropriate to their age and abilities, teaching them to organize merchandise, count bells, and most importantly, treat every customer with the respect and consideration that formed the foundation of everything Nook's Cranny represented. These early lessons in business ethics were delivered not through formal instruction but through the daily example of watching Tom interact with villagers, observing how he balanced fairness with kindness, how he made decisions that prioritized community welfare over profit maximization, how he treated even the most difficult customers with patience and understanding. The Kits absorbed these lessons with the intensity that children bring to learning about the adult world they are preparing to enter, their questions often forcing Tom to articulate principles he had internalized so completely that he rarely thought about them consciously. The transformation in Timmy and Tommy, as they adjusted to their new life, was remarkable to witness, their initial wariness and fear gradually giving way to the natural enthusiasm and playfulness that should characterize childhood, but had been suppressed by their earlier experiences. They began to laugh at Tom's gentle jokes, to offer their own observations about store operations, to express preferences and opinions with the confidence that comes from knowing that their voices will be heard and their feelings respected. Their academic progress was equally encouraging, as the stability and support of their new environment allowed natural abilities that had been stunted by trauma and neglect to flourish. They proved to be particularly gifted at mathematics and organization, skills that translated naturally into understanding business operations and inventory management. Their teachers reported that they were not only catching up to their age-appropriate grade levels, but often exceeding expectations in areas where their practical experience with store operations provided relevant background knowledge. Yet it was their emotional development that provided Tom with the greatest satisfaction, as he watched two children who had learned to expect disappointment and abandonment slowly begin to trust in the permanence of their new situation. The nightmares that had plagued their early weeks in his care became less frequent. Their defensive behaviors gave way to genuine affection, and most importantly, they began to plan for a future that they now believed would actually materialize. The first time Tommy mentioned what he wanted to be when he grew up, his voice filled with the kind of excitement that can only come from a child who has rediscovered the right to dream about tomorrow. Tom felt tears sting his eyes as he recognized the magnitude of what had been accomplished through nothing more complex than consistent love and unwavering commitment to their welfare. These were children who were learning to trust again, to hope again, to see themselves as valuable individuals worthy of care and investment. The impact of the Kit's presence on Nook's Cranny and the broader village community was equally transformative, as their natural enthusiasm and curiosity brought a sense of vitality and purpose to daily operations that had previously been conducted with efficiency, but perhaps lacked the spark of genuine joy. Customers found themselves lingering longer in the store, drawn by the children's infectious laughter and their eager questions about the goods and services they encountered. The educational opportunities that emerged from this environment were remarkable in their richness and relevance. As Timmy and Tommy learned about commerce and community service through direct participation rather than abstract instruction, they observed the seasonal rhythms of small-town retail, understood the importance of maintaining inventory that met genuine community needs, witnessed firsthand how honest business practices created relationships that extended far beyond simple commercial transactions. Their questions often led to impromptu lessons that benefited not just the kits but any customers who happened to be present, creating an informal learning environment where business principles were explained in terms that even children could understand. Tom found himself articulating his philosophy of commerce more clearly than ever before, using language that would be accessible to young minds while remaining true to the complex principles that guided his decision-making. The seasonal festivals and community events that punctuated village life took on new meaning as Tom experienced them through the eyes of children who were encountering these traditions for the first time. Their wonder at the harvest celebration, their excitement about gift-giving during the winter holidays, their careful participation in spring planting activities all served to remind him of the magic that he had perhaps taken for granted after years of adult familiarity with these beloved rituals. Planning these celebrations became collaborative efforts that included the kids' input and participation, their fresh perspectives often suggesting improvements or additions that enhanced the experiences for everyone involved. They helped design decorations for the store during holiday seasons, assisted with organizing community gift exchanges, and gradually took on increasing responsibility for various aspects of event planning and execution. The business skills that Timmy and Tommy developed through these experiences were comprehensive and practical, encompassing everything from basic mathematics and record keeping to customer relations and community engagement. They learned to calculate change and manage transactions, to understand the relationship between cost, markup, and final pricing, to recognize the importance of maintaining accurate inventory records and planning for seasonal fluctuations in demand. More importantly, they absorbed the ethical principles that distinguished Tom's approach to business from the exploitative practices he had witnessed during his urban years. They learned that success should be measured not by profit margins, but by community impact, that customer satisfaction was more valuable than short-term gains, that honest dealing created relationships that sustained businesses through difficult periods when pure transactional approaches would fail. The mentorship that Tom provided extended far beyond business training to encompass the kind of comprehensive life education that prepared them not just for careers but for citizenship. In a community that valued cooperation and mutual support, they learned about personal responsibility and the importance of keeping commitments, about the satisfaction that comes from work well done, and the dignity that accompanies honest labor, about the ways that individual actions contribute to collective well-being. The bond that developed between Tom and his adopted nephews was built on foundations of mutual respect and genuine affection that transformed all three of their lives in profound ways. For the Kits, Tom represented stability and security after years of uncertainty, a father figure who provided not just material support but the kind of guidance and encouragement that allowed their natural talents to flourish. For Tom, Timmy and Tommy offered the opportunity to pass on the values and wisdom he had accumulated through his own journey from village childhood through urban disillusionment to mature understanding of what truly mattered in life. Their presence in his daily routine created the kind of purposeful structure that transformed work from mere occupation into meaningful vocation as every business decision now carried the additional weight of serving as an example for young minds who were learning to navigate the complex relationships between individual ambition and community responsibility. The store that had begun as Tom's attempt to serve his neighbors became also a laboratory for developing the next generation of ethical business leaders. The conversations that filled their shared living space above Nook's cranny ranged across every topic imaginable, from practical questions about store operations to philosophical discussions about the nature of success and happiness. Tom found himself articulating beliefs and values that had been shaped by experience but never formally examined, his explanations to the kids serving also as clarifications of his own thinking about the principles that should guide a life well lived. The academic excellence that both children achieved under this nurturing environment was gratifying but secondary to the character development that Tom witnessed as they matured from frightened refugees into confident young individuals who understood their worth and their responsibilities to others. They learned to treat everyone with dignity, regardless of their social status or economic circumstances, to find satisfaction in solving problems and meeting challenges, to value honesty and fairness, even when shortcuts might seem tempting. The expansion of Nook's cranny that became necessary as the village grew and the store's reputation spread to neighboring communities was planned and executed as a family project, with Timmy and Tommy contributing ideas and labor appropriate to their developing abilities. They helped design the new layout to maximize efficiency and customer convenience, participated in the renovation work that transformed a simple shop into a more comprehensive retail operation, and celebrated each milestone in the expansion process as a shared achievement. The success of this expansion, measured by every metric that Tom had learned to value, validated not just his business philosophy but also his approach to mentorship and family building. The store that had begun as a single man's attempt to serve his community had evolved into a multi-generational enterprise that embodied principles of ethical commerce while providing practical education for the leaders of tomorrow. As Timmy and Tommy entered adolescence with the confidence and competence that characterized young people who have been raised with love and high expectations, Tom began to envision a future where his life's work would continue beyond his own years through the values and skills he had instilled in them. The kids who had arrived at his door as frightened refugees were becoming young adults who understood that true success lay not in what they could accumulate for themselves, but in what they could contribute to the welfare of others. The village that had welcomed Tom home after his urban disappointments had gained not just a dedicated merchant, but a father who was raising the next generation of community leaders. Young people who understood that business success and social responsibility were not competing goals, but complementary aspects of a life lived with integrity and purpose. The revelation that would transform Tom Nook from shopkeeper to visionary came not in a moment of sudden inspiration, but through the gradual accumulation of countless small observations about the struggles his neighbors faced in creating the kind of homes that would truly serve their needs and reflect their dreams. As Timmy and Tommy grew into capable young assistants who could manage many aspects of Nook's cranny with minimal supervision, Tom found himself with the mental space to contemplate problems that extended beyond the immediate concerns of retail commerce into the deeper question of what it meant to build not just a business, but a community where every individual could flourish. The catalyst for his expanded thinking was Mrs. Squirrel, an elderly widow whose ramshackle cottage had deteriorated to the point where winter winds whistled through gaps in the walls and summer rains created pools of water on her bedroom floor. Her fixed income made major repairs impossible through conventional means, while her pride prevented her from accepting what she would have perceived as charity from neighbors who had their own financial challenges to manage. Tom's initial response to her predicament was characteristically direct and practical. He organized a community work party that repaired the most urgent problems while framing the effort as a neighborly tradition rather than a rescue operation. Yet even as Mrs. Squirrel's immediate housing crisis was resolved, Tom found himself contemplating the broader implications of a situation where someone who had contributed to the community for decades could find herself living in conditions that threatened her health and dignity. The conversations that these reflections sparked with village elders like Mr. Tortimer revealed that Mrs. Squirrel's situation was far from unique, that many residents lived in homes that were inadequate to their needs, but lacked the resources to make necessary improvements or the options to relocate to more suitable accommodations. The village that had provided Tom with healing and purpose was itself constrained by economic realities that prevented many of its members from achieving the kind of comfortable, secure living situations that should be every person's right. The housing shortage that affected the broader region had been developing for years as young people migrated from rural areas to urban centers in search of economic opportunities, leaving behind a housing stock that was aging and often unsuited to modern needs. The few available properties commanded prices that placed them beyond the reach of many working families, while the cost of new construction made development projects financially unviable for most potential builders. Tom's urban experience had exposed him to the sophisticated financial mechanisms that made large-scale development possible in city environments, knowledge that had seemed irrelevant to his village life until he began to consider how such systems might be adapted to serve rural communities with very different needs and resources. The principles remained the same, even if the scale and specific applications would need to be dramatically modified. Identify unmet needs, develop sustainable solutions, create systems that aligned individual benefit with collective welfare. The vision that began to emerge from these considerations was both simple in its essential concept and revolutionary in its potential implications for how communities could address housing challenges without sacrificing the values and relationships that made them worth living in. Rather than waiting for external developers to recognize profit opportunities in rural markets, what if the community itself could become the developer, with Tom serving as the facilitator who would make home ownership accessible to people who had been excluded from conventional real estate markets? The financial innovation that would make this vision possible was inspired by Tom's observation of how village economics actually functioned, based more on relationships and mutual support than on the rigid contractual structures that dominated urban commercial dealings. If someone needed a home but lacked the immediate resources to purchase one, why couldn't the transaction be structured as a long-term partnership where payments were calibrated to ability rather than market rates, where the goal was successful home ownership rather than profit maximization? The first experimental implementation of this concept involved young Billy Goat, now grown into a capable carpenter, whose skills were in constant demand throughout the village, but whose irregular income made traditional mortgage qualification impossible. Billy dreamed of building a workshop where he could expand his craft while providing space for his growing family, but conventional lending institutions viewed his self-employment status and rural location as unacceptable risks. Tom's proposal was characteristically straightforward. He would provide the upfront capital necessary to purchase materials and secure the building site, while Billy would contribute his labor and expertise to the construction process. The resulting debt would be repaid through a combination of cash payments calibrated to Billy's seasonal income patterns and work credits earned through projects that benefited the broader community, creating a system where home ownership became achievable without creating unsustainable financial burdens. The success of Billy's project both as a practical housing solution and as a demonstration of alternative financing possibilities, generated interest throughout the village and beyond. As word spread of Tom's innovative approach to making homeownership accessible, the workshop that Billy built with Tom's support became not just a family residence, but a community asset where neighbors could borrow tools, learn skills, and collaborate on projects that strengthened the social fabric of their shared home. The philosophical foundation that guided Tom's expansion into housing development reflected the same principles that had shaped his operation of Nook's Cranny, with service to community welfare taking precedence over profit maximization and long-term relationships valued above short-term financial gains. The goal was not to extract maximum value from housing transactions, but to create sustainable systems that would enable more people to achieve the security and dignity that homeownership could provide. This approach required Tom to develop entirely new skills and knowledge bases, from understanding construction techniques and building codes to navigating the complex regulatory environments that governed property development. Yet the learning process was facilitated by the same collaborative spirit that had characterized his integration into village life, as neighbors with relevant expertise freely shared their knowledge, while customers at Nook's Cranny offered insights and suggestions based on their own housing experiences. The expansion of his operations to include housing development also necessitated significant changes to Tom's business model and daily routines, as managing construction projects and coordinating with multiple contractors required attention and energy that had previously been devoted entirely to retail operations. The solution that emerged reflected the maturation of Timmy and Tommy into genuine partners rather than merely assistants, as they assumed increasing responsibility for store management. While Tom focused on the more complex aspects of his development projects, the mentorship opportunities that this transition created were invaluable for the young raccoon's development, as they gained experience in independent decision-making while continuing to operate according to the ethical principles and community-focused values that had shaped their understanding of what business could be when conducted with integrity and genuine concern for others' welfare. Their natural abilities in mathematics and organization proved perfectly suited to the demands of retail management, while their enthusiasm for helping neighbors made them ideal ambassadors for the kind of customer service that had made Nook's Cranny a beloved community institution. The housing projects that followed Billy's successful workshop reflected increasing sophistication in Tom's understanding of how to balance individual needs with community benefits. Each development designed not just to provide shelter, but to strengthen the social and economic networks that made village life both viable and rewarding. The modest homes he facilitated were carefully integrated into existing neighborhoods, their architecture reflecting local traditions, while incorporating modern conveniences that improved quality of life without disrupting established cultural patterns. The financing mechanisms that made these projects possible evolved with each implementation, becoming more refined and flexible as Tom learned to anticipate the various challenges that potential homeowners might face. Payment schedules were customized to accommodate seasonal income fluctuations common in agricultural communities, while work credit systems enabled people with valuable skills but limited cash resources to contribute meaningfully to their own housing costs. The no-interest policy that became Tom's signature innovation reflected his understanding that traditional lending practices often created insurmountable barriers for exactly the people who would benefit most from homeownership. Opportunities. By eliminating interest charges and focusing instead on cost recovery and sustainable cash flow, he could offer housing solutions that remained financially viable while being genuinely accessible to working families who had been excluded from conventional real estate markets. The community impact of Tom's housing initiatives extended far beyond the immediate beneficiaries to encompass economic effects that strengthened the entire village and surrounding region. Each new household represented additional customers for local businesses, additional participants in community organizations, additional contributors to the tax base that supported shared infrastructure and services. The construction projects themselves provided employment opportunities for local craftspeople, while creating demand for materials and supplies that could often be sourced from regional suppliers. The social benefits were equally significant, as families who had been forced to live in inadequate or insecure housing situations gained the stability and pride that homeownership could provide. Children who had moved frequently due to their families' housing challenges could now attend the same school consistently, forming lasting friendships and participating in community activities that enriched their development. Adults who had devoted excessive portions of their income to rent could now invest in improvements and modifications that made their living spaces truly their own. The reputation that Tom developed as a housing innovator began to attract attention from other rural communities facing similar challenges, leading to requests for consultation and collaboration that expanded his influence far beyond his original village. These connections created opportunities to share successful strategies while learning from the experiences of others who were experimenting with alternative approaches to community development. The regional network that gradually emerged from these relationships represented a new model for rural economic development, one that prioritized local control and community benefit over external investment and profit extraction. Tom found himself serving not just as a developer but as a facilitator and educator, sharing the financial and organizational innovations that had made his projects successful while adapting them to the specific needs and circumstances of different communities. The personal satisfaction that Tom derived from his housing work surpassed even the fulfillment he had found in operating Nook's Cranny, as he witnessed the transformative effects that secure, affordable housing could have on individuals and families who had previously struggled with uncertainty and inadequate living conditions. The tears of joy in a young mother's eyes when she received the keys to her family's first owned home, the pride in an elderly craftsman's voice as he described the workshop space that would allow him to pursue his passion well into retirement, the excitement of children who would finally have bedrooms of their own. These moments reminded Tom daily of why his work mattered in ways that transcended any financial calculations. The integration of his retail and development operations created synergies that benefited both aspects of his business, while providing comprehensive support for community members navigating the complex process of establishing new households. Nook's Cranny became not just a source of household goods but a resource center where new homeowners could find everything from basic tools and maintenance supplies to advice about home improvement projects and connections with reliable service providers. The expansion of his inventory to include construction materials and home improvement supplies reflected Tom's growing understanding of how retail and development services could complement each other in ways that served community needs more comprehensively than either could accomplish independently. Customers planning renovation projects could purchase materials at fair prices while receiving expert advice about techniques and approaches, while Tom could maintain relationships with suppliers and contractors that benefited all his various business activities. The educational component that emerged naturally from this integration proved valuable both for his immediate customers and for the broader community's understanding of housing and construction topics that many people encountered infrequently but needed to navigate successfully when circumstances required. Tom's patient explanations of everything from basic plumbing maintenance to the advantages of different roofing materials helped community members make informed decisions about their housing needs while building confidence in their plumbing ability to maintain and improve their properties. The legacy planning that became increasingly important as Tom's housing development activities expanded led to formal arrangements that would ensure the continuation of his innovative approaches, even if his personal involvement eventually decreased. The systems and procedures he developed were carefully documented and shared with Timmy and Tommy, who demonstrated natural aptitude for the organizational and interpersonal skills that made community-focused development possible. The philosophical framework that guided these planning efforts reflected Tom's deepest convictions about what business could accomplish when conducted according to principles that valued human welfare above profit maximization, community stability above individual accumulation, long-term sustainability above short-term gains. The structures he created were designed to perpetuate these values across generations of leadership, ensuring that his innovations would continue to serve community needs long after he was no longer available to provide personal oversight. The transformation that had begun with a simple desire to help Mrs. Squirrel repair her leaking roof had evolved into a comprehensive approach to community development that addressed one of the most fundamental human needs, while demonstrating how business success and social responsibility could not only coexist but actually reinforce each other in ways that created lasting value for everyone involved. As Tom surveyed the village that had welcomed him home and now bore the visible marks of his decade-long commitment to improving the lives of his neighbors, he felt a satisfaction that was deeper and more lasting than anything his urban business ventures had ever provided. This was success measured by standards that mattered, achievement that strengthened rather than exploited the relationships and resources that made community life possible and rewarding. The vision that would ultimately transform Tom Nook from a beloved village developer into the architect of entirely new communities began to crystallize during a conversation with a young couple who had visited his village specifically to learn about his innovative housing programs. Their faces bright with the kind of hope that comes to people who have finally discovered a solution to problems that had seemed insurmountable. They spoke of their dream to escape the crowded urban environment where they had been struggling to establish their careers, to find a place where they could raise children in safety and peace, while still having access to the opportunities and amenities that would allow them to build meaningful lives. Tom found himself learning about subjects he had never imagined would be relevant to his work, from water purification systems and renewable energy generation to soil science and marine ecology. The financial structure that would make these ambitious projects viable required innovations that extended far beyond the payment plans and work credit systems Tom had developed for his village housing initiatives. Creating entire communities demanded substantial upfront investments in infrastructure and planning that could not be recouped through individual home sales alone, necessitating the development of new models that could attract the necessary capital while maintaining the ethical standards and community-focused values that distinguished his approach from conventional development practices. The solution that emerged reflected Tom's growing understanding of how to align diverse interests in ways that served everyone involved. With the initial costs of infrastructure development supported through a combination of his own accumulated resources, partnerships with suppliers and contractors who shared his vision of responsible development, and innovative financing arrangements with potential residents who were willing to invest in the long-term success of their future communities rather than simply purchasing finished products. The site selection process for the first experimental island development involved extensive research into factors that would affect both the practical viability and the environmental sustainability of the proposed community. Tom worked with marine biologists and environmental consultants to identify locations that could support human habitation without disrupting existing ecosystems, while also ensuring access to the transportation networks that would be necessary for residents who needed to maintain connections with the broader economic and cultural systems of the mainland. The island that was ultimately chosen for the inaugural Desert Island Getaway Package project possessed all the characteristics necessary for success. Sufficient fresh water sources to support a small population, soil conditions suitable for gardening and small-scale agriculture, natural harbors that could accommodate the boats and seaplanes necessary for transportation, and diverse ecosystems that could provide both practical benefits and aesthetic pleasure for residents who chose to make their homes in this pristine environment. The master planning process that guided the development of this first island community reflected Tom's commitment to creating spaces that would enhance rather than diminish the natural beauty and ecological integrity of their setting. Rather than imposing a rigid, predetermined layout on the landscape, the community design evolved organically in response to natural features and environmental constraints, with residential areas positioned to take advantage of favorable microclimates while preserving the most sensitive ecosystems for shared enjoyment and protection. The infrastructure systems that supported the island community were designed according to principles of sustainability and self-sufficiency that would minimize environmental impact while providing all the modern conveniences that residents expected from their living situations. Solar panels and wind generators provided clean electricity, while sophisticated water filtration and recycling systems ensured that the island's precious freshwater resources would be used efficiently and protected from contamination. The residential options available through the Desert Island Getaway Package reflected Tom's understanding that different people had different needs and preferences when it came to their living situations, with a range of housing types designed to accommodate everything from single individuals seeking peaceful solitude to large families requiring space for children and extended relatives. Each home was positioned to provide privacy while maintaining connection to shared community spaces and resources, creating neighborhoods that fostered both individual autonomy and collective cooperation. The economic model that made these island communities financially sustainable, without compromising their environmental or social values, required careful balance between the costs of providing necessary services and the ability of residents to afford their chosen lifestyle. The no-interest loan system that had proven successful in Tom's village housing projects was adapted to accommodate the higher costs and greater complexity of island living, with payment schedules that recognized the unique challenges and opportunities that came with choosing such an unconventional residential option. The application process for potential residents reflected Tom's commitment to creating communities where people would be compatible with both the physical environment and the social values that made such experiments possible. Rather than simply accepting anyone who could afford the financial requirements, careful screening ensured that new residents shared the commitment to environmental stewardship, community cooperation, and mutual support that were essential for the long-term success of these intentional communities. The services and amenities that were provided as part of the island living experience went far beyond simple housing to encompass comprehensive support for the lifestyle changes that accompanied such a dramatic relocation. Tom worked with specialists in everything from sustainable agriculture and renewable energy systems to remote work technologies and distance education to ensure that residents would have access to the resources they needed to maintain productive and fulfilling lives in their new environment. The community governance structures that were established for each island reflected principles of participatory democracy and consensus building that encouraged residents to take active roles in decision-making processes while providing mechanisms for resolving conflicts and managing shared resources in ways that preserved the collaborative spirit that made such communities possible. Regular meetings and communication systems ensured that everyone's voice could be heard while maintaining the efficiency necessary for effective community management. The environmental education component that was built into every aspect of island life reflected Tom's understanding that successful, sustainable communities required residents who understood and appreciated the ecological systems that supported their lifestyle choices. Educational programs and hands-on learning opportunities helped newcomers develop the knowledge and skills necessary to live harmoniously with their natural environment, while contributing to ongoing conservation and restoration efforts. The success of the first island community, measured by the satisfaction and commitment of its residents, as well as its minimal environmental impact and economic sustainability, generated interest from potential residents around the world who were seeking alternatives to conventional living arrangements. The waiting list for subsequent projects grew rapidly as word spread about the unique lifestyle and community values that Tom's developments offered to people willing to embrace a different approach to modern living. The expansion of the program to include multiple island communities with different characteristics and specializations allowed Tom to experiment with various approaches to sustainable community development while providing options for people with diverse needs and preferences. Some islands focused on agricultural self-sufficiency and traditional crafts, while others emphasized technology-based remote work and modern amenities, creating a network of communities that could share resources and knowledge, while maintaining their distinct identities and special characteristics. The partnerships that Tom developed with environmental organizations, academic institutions, and government agencies interested in sustainable development research transformed his island communities into living laboratories where innovative approaches to community planning and resource management could be tested and refined. These collaborations provided additional resources for ongoing improvements while contributing to broader understanding of how human communities could exist in harmony with natural ecosystems. The training programs that Tom established for other developers and community planners interested in applying his principles and methods to their own projects reflected his commitment to spreading the benefits of his innovations beyond his own immediate enterprises. These educational initiatives shared both the technical knowledge and the philosophical frameworks that had made his island communities successful, contributing to a growing movement of developers who prioritized environmental, sustainability, and community well-being over profit maximization. The personal satisfaction that Tom derived from witnessing the transformation of empty islands into thriving communities where people could live according to their deepest values and environmental commitments surpassed even the fulfillment he had found in his previous housing and retail work. The letters and testimonials from residents who described how their island homes had allowed them to escape stressful urban lifestyles while maintaining productive careers and raising healthy, happy families provided daily reminders of why his work mattered in ways that transcended financial success. The integration of advanced technology with traditional environmental practices in the island communities reflected Tom's understanding that sustainability and modern convenience were not mutually exclusive goals, but could be combined in ways that enhanced both environmental protection and quality of life. High-speed internet connections enabled residents to maintain professional connections with the global economy, while solar power and organic gardening practices minimized their ecological footprint and provided examples of how modern communities could exist within natural limits. The cultural and recreational opportunities that developed naturally within the island communities reflected the diverse interests and talents of residents who had chosen to prioritize quality of life over conventional measures of success. Art studios and music venues, organic farms and craft workshops, libraries and learning centers emerged organically as community members contributed their skills and passions to creating rich, fulfilling environments that nurtured both individual creativity and collective well-being. The long-term planning that guided the development of each island community reflected Tom's commitment to creating places that would remain viable and attractive across generations of residents, with infrastructure and governance systems designed to adapt to changing needs and circumstances, while maintaining the core values and environmental principles that defined their essential character. These communities were built not just for their initial residents, but for the children and grandchildren who would inherit them, ensuring that the benefits of sustainable living would continue to be available for future generations who chose to embrace this alternative approach to modern life. The legacy that Tom was building through his island development projects extended far beyond the individual communities themselves, to encompass a new model for how human settlements could be created and managed in ways that enhanced rather than degraded the natural environments that supported them. Each successful project provided proof that alternatives to conventional development were not only possible, but could be more satisfying and sustainable than the approaches that had dominated the industry for generations. As Tom stood on the dock of his newest island community, watching the sun set over waters that remained as clear and pristine as they had been before human habitation, surrounded by the sounds of children playing and adults engaged in meaningful work and genuine community life, he felt a profound satisfaction that came from knowing he had helped create something truly worthwhile, something that proved human communities could exist in harmony with the natural world, while providing all the opportunities and amenities necessary for lives of dignity, creativity, and fulfillment. The transformation of Tom Nook from ambitious developer to beloved community patriarch was not marked by any single moment of recognition, but emerged gradually through countless small interactions and quiet observations that revealed the profound depth of his commitment to the welfare of those whose lives had been touched by his vision of what communities could become when they were built on foundations of mutual care and shared prosperity. The success of his island developments and housing initiatives had brought him recognition and financial security that exceeded anything he had imagined during his village childhood or his difficult urban years. Yet it was the relationships he had fostered and the trust he had earned that provided the true measure of his accomplishments. The daily rhythms of life in the communities Tom had helped create revealed patterns of interdependence and cooperation that spoke to something fundamental about human nature when it was allowed to express itself in environments designed to encourage collaboration rather than competition. The residents of his island getaways and village housing projects had formed networks of mutual support that extended far beyond simple, neighborly courtesy into genuine care for each other's well-being, creating social fabrics that were both resilient and nurturing. Tom's role in fostering these relationships was often invisible to casual observers, manifested not in grand gestures or formal programs, but in the countless small decisions and daily interactions that demonstrated his commitment to creating spaces where people could flourish according to their own natures and aspirations. His presence at community meetings was marked by careful listening rather than dominating discourse. His contributions focused on asking questions that helped residents identify their own needs and develop their own solutions, rather than imposing predetermined answers from his position of authority. The psychology that informed Tom's approach to community building had been shaped by his own experiences of belonging and displacement, of trust earned and trust betrayed, of the difference between relationships based on mutual benefit and those rooted in genuine care for others' welfare. His understanding that true security came not from individual accumulation, but from collective well-being, influenced every aspect of how he structured his business relationships and community development projects. The financial innovations that had made Tom's housing and development work possible were built on principles that challenged conventional wisdom about debt, interest, and the relationship between lending and borrowing. His refusal to charge interest on loans was not simply a marketing strategy or an act of charity, but reflected a fundamental belief that money should serve human needs rather than becoming an end in itself, that financial systems should create opportunities for people to improve their lives rather than trapping them in cycles of dependency and obligation. The no-deadline approach that characterized Tom's lending practices emerged from his observation that people's lives rarely followed the rigid schedules that conventional financing required, that circumstances could change in ways that made predetermined payment schedules impossible to maintain, regardless of the borrower's good intentions or commitment to honoring their obligations. By removing the pressure of artificial deadlines, he created space for people to navigate life's inevitable challenges while still maintaining their commitment to eventually fulfilling their financial responsibilities. This patient approach to debt collection was often misunderstood by outside observers who interpreted Tom's flexibility as poor business practice or naive trust in human nature. Yet his experience had demonstrated that people were far more likely to honor their commitments when those commitments were structured in ways that acknowledged their dignity and respected their circumstances. The default rates on his loans were actually lower than those of conventional lenders, not because his borrowers were more creditworthy by traditional standards, but because the terms of their agreements created genuine partnerships rather than adversarial relationships. The deeper meaning behind Tom's characteristic "yes, yes" catchphrase revealed itself through years of interaction with residents and customers who had learned to recognize the affirmation and encouragement that these simple words conveyed, far from being merely a verbal habit or an attempt to appear agreeable. This phrase represented Tom's fundamental orientation toward possibility and potential, his instinctive response to focus on what could be accomplished, rather than dwelling on obstacles and limitations. The psychological impact of this consistently positive approach on the people who interacted with Tom was profound and far-reaching, creating atmospheres of hope and confidence that enabled individuals to pursue goals and dreams they might have dismissed as unrealistic in more skeptical environments. Children who had grown up around Tom learned to approach challenges with optimism and creativity, while adults who had been worn down by life's disappointments often found their sense of possibility restored through his patient encouragement and practical support. The behind-the-scenes work that Tom performed to ensure the smooth functioning of his various communities was extensive and largely invisible, involving everything from coordinating maintenance and repair services to mediating disputes between residents and facilitating connections between people whose skills and needs complemented each other. His office above Nook's cranny often served as an informal counseling center, where community members could discuss problems and explore solutions in an environment free from judgment or pressure. The counseling skills that Tom had developed through years of listening to his neighbors' concerns and helping them work through various challenges were entirely self-taught and rooted in his genuine care for others' well-being rather than any formal training in psychology or social work. His approach was characterized by patient listening, thoughtful questions, and a talent for helping people see their situations from new perspectives that revealed previously hidden options and opportunities. The family dynamics that had developed between Tom and his adopted nephews, Timmy and Tommy, provided a model for the kind of relationships he hoped to foster throughout his communities, demonstrating how individuals from different backgrounds and experiences could come together to create bonds that transcended biology or legal obligation. The boys had grown into young adults who embodied the values and principles that Tom had tried to model throughout their shared years, their natural kindness and business acumen, making them ideal successors to carry forward his vision of ethical commerce and community service. The mentorship opportunities that Tom created for other young people in his communities reflected his understanding that sustainable development required not just physical infrastructure but human capital, individuals who possessed both the technical skills and the ethical foundations necessary to maintain and improve the systems that made community life possible. His informal educational programs covered everything from basic business principles and construction techniques to conflict resolution and environmental stewardship. The relationships that Tom maintained with the various service providers and contractors who supported his development projects were characterized by the same principles of fairness and mutual respect that guided all his business dealings. He paid promptly and fairly, provided clear specifications and realistic timelines, and treated every worker with dignity, regardless of their position in the project hierarchy, creating work environments where people took pride in their contributions and felt valued as essential members of collaborative efforts. The network of professionals that Tom had assembled to support his various projects represented a carefully cultivated community of individuals who shared his commitment to quality work and ethical business practices. These relationships, built over years of successful collaborations, enabled him to deliver services and solutions that consistently exceeded his customers' expectations, while maintaining the cost controls that made his innovations financially accessible to people with modest incomes. The environmental consciousness that informed every aspect of Tom's development work reflected his deep appreciation for the natural world and his understanding that human communities could only thrive when they existed in harmony with the ecosystems that supported them. His projects consistently incorporated the latest advances in sustainable building practices, renewable energy systems, and resource conservation techniques, demonstrating that environmental responsibility and modern convenience were not mutually exclusive goals. The educational component of Tom's environmental initiatives extended beyond his immediate residence to encompass broader community awareness of how individual choices affected collective well-being and environmental health. His developments served as demonstration sites where visitors could observe practical applications of sustainable living principles and learn techniques they could apply in their own homes and communities. The social events and cultural activities that flourished in Tom's communities emerged naturally from the diverse interests and talents of residents who felt supported in pursuing their passions and sharing them with others. Art shows and music concerts, craft workshops and cooking classes, book clubs and gardening societies all contributed to the rich social fabric that made these communities attractive, not just as places to live, but as environments where people could develop and express their full potential as human beings. The governance structures that Tom helped establish in his various communities reflected his belief in democratic participation and shared responsibility, with decision-making processes that encouraged broad input while maintaining the efficiency necessary for effective community management. These systems evolved continuously as residents gained experience in self-governance and developed increasingly sophisticated approaches to managing their shared resources and resolving conflicts. The conflict resolution methods that Tom had developed through years of mediating disputes between neighbors and business associates were based on principles of mutual respect and collaborative problem-solving rather than adversarial, competition or authoritarian decree. His approach focused on helping parties understand each other's perspectives and interests, identifying common ground, and developing solutions that addressed everyone's core needs, even when surface positions seemed irreconcilable. The long-term vision that guided Tom's community development work extended far beyond the immediate needs of current residents to encompass the kind of world he hoped to leave for future generations. Communities that would serve as models for how human settlements could enhance, rather than degrade, the natural and social environments that sustained them. His projects were designed not just for current success, but for intergenerational sustainability, with systems and structures that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential character and values. The personal satisfaction that Tom derived from his work came not from external recognition or financial rewards, but from the daily evidence that his efforts were making genuine differences in people's lives, that the communities he had helped create were places where individuals could flourish and families could thrive in safety and dignity. The letters and conversations that brought news of residents' achievements and happiness provided constant reminders of why his work mattered in ways that transcended any conventional measures of business success. The wisdom that Tom had accumulated through decades of community building and relationship development was shared freely with anyone who expressed genuine interest in learning from his experiences, his office serving as an informal academy where aspiring developers, community organizers, and social entrepreneurs could gain insights into the practical and philosophical foundations of his innovative approaches to serving human needs while building sustainable enterprises. The legacy that Tom was creating through his life's work extended far beyond the physical structures and financial systems he had developed to encompass a demonstration that business success and social responsibility were not competing objectives, but complementary aspects of enterprises that served authentic human needs while honoring the dignity and potential of every individual they touched. As evening settled over the various communities that bore the mark of Tom's vision and care, as lights came on in homes where families gathered around dinner tables to share the events of their days and plan for tomorrow's possibilities, the quiet satisfaction that filled his heart was the satisfaction of work well done, of problems solved and dreams realized, of a life spent in service to the simple but profound goal of helping others build the kinds of lives and communities that would allow them to flourish according to their deepest values and highest aspirations. The moments of quiet reflection that had become increasingly precious to Tom Nook as the years accumulated like layers of sediment in a peaceful riverbed often found him standing at the window of his office above what had once been a simple village store, gazing out over landscapes that bore the visible evidence of dreams transformed into reality through patience, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to the belief that business could be a force for healing rather than harm. The view that met his eyes encompassed not just the physical structures he had helped bring into being, but the intangible networks of relationship and mutual support that represented his truest and most lasting achievements. The communities that had grown from his vision stretched across multiple islands and mainland developments, each one a unique expression of the principles he had spent decades refining and implementing, yet all united by their commitment to the radical proposition that human welfare should take precedence over profit maximization, that success should be measured by lives improved rather than wealth accumulated, that true prosperity could only be achieved when it was shared rather than hoarded by the fortunate few. The journey that had brought him to this point of contemplation seemed both impossibly long and surprisingly brief, as if the young raccoon who had once dreamed of urban conquest and the mature businessman who had learned to find fulfillment in service to others were separated not by decades, but by a single transformative moment of recognition that everything he had once thought he wanted was actually preventing him from discovering what he truly needed. The betrayal that had shattered his partnership with Red, once a source of pain so acute that it had driven him from the city and back to the healing embrace of his village home, now appeared in the broader context of his life story as a necessary catalyst for growth, a painful but essential lesson that had forced him to confront the difference between cleverness and wisdom, between individual advancement and collective flourishing, between relationships based on mutual exploitation and those rooted in genuine care for others' well-being. The character development that had emerged from that crisis reflected Tom's growing understanding that strength lay not in invulnerability, but in the willingness to remain open to others despite the risk of disappointment, that true success required the courage to trust again, even after trust had been violated, that the capacity to forgive was not a sign of weakness, but evidence of the kind of wisdom that could only be earned through suffering transformed into compassion. The philosophy of business that Tom had developed through years of trial and refinement represented a complete rejection of the zero-sum thinking that dominated conventional commerce, replacing competition with collaboration, scarcity with abundance, fear with hope as the fundamental organizing principles that guided his decision-making processes. His enterprises succeeded not by defeating competitors or exploiting market inefficiencies, but by identifying genuine human needs and developing sustainable systems for meeting those needs in ways that honored the dignity and potential of everyone involved. The financial success that had followed from this approach confounded critics who had predicted that his idealistic methods would prove unsustainable in competitive marketplaces, yet the evidence was undeniable that businesses operated according to principles of fairness and mutual benefit could not only survive, but thrive in ways that created lasting value for all stakeholders, rather than merely concentrating wealth in the hands of ownership. The secret of this success lay not in any revolutionary techniques or innovative technologies, but in the simple recognition that people responded positively to being treated with respect and consideration, that customers became loyal advocates when they felt genuinely valued rather than merely tolerated, that employees performed their best work when they understood that their contributions were appreciated and their welfare was a genuine concern rather than a legal obligation to be minimized. The mentorship relationships that Tom had cultivated with Timmy and Tommy represented the culmination of everything he had learned about nurturing talent and character in ways that preserved individual uniqueness while instilling shared values and common purpose. The young raccoons had grown into capable adults whose natural abilities had been enhanced by years of patient guidance and practical experience, their development demonstrating that leadership could be taught through example and encouragement rather than authority and intimidation. The pride that Tom felt in their accomplishments was the pride of a parent who had succeeded in raising children to surpass their teacher's achievements while remaining true to the fundamental principles that had shaped their upbringing. Timmy and Tommy possessed not only the technical skills necessary to manage complex business operations, but the ethical foundations and interpersonal sensitivity required to maintain the kind of relationships that made such operations sustainable across generations of leadership. The succession planning that had become increasingly important as Tom entered what might be described as the twilight phase of his active career was guided by his commitment to ensuring that the values and practices he had spent decades developing would continue to guide his enterprises long after his personal involvement ended. The systems and procedures he had established were designed not merely to preserve existing operations, but to enable continued innovation and adaptation, while maintaining fidelity to core principles that prioritized community welfare over individual enrichment. The documentation and training programs that supported this transition reflected Tom's understanding that sustainable institutions required more than just capable leadership. They needed cultures that could transmit essential values and knowledge across changes in personnel and circumstances, creating organizational memories that preserved hard-won wisdom while remaining flexible enough to respond to evolving challenges and opportunities. The broader influence that Tom's approach to business had exerted on the development industry and the communities he had served extended far beyond his immediate sphere of operations to encompass a growing network of developers, planners, and entrepreneurs who had adopted similar principles and methods in their own work. The conferences and workshops where he shared his experiences had become gathering places for individuals committed to demonstrating that alternatives to exploitative business practices were not only possible, but more satisfying and sustainable than conventional approaches. The recognition that Tom had received from professional organizations and academic institutions, while personally gratifying, was less important to him than the evidence that his innovations were being adapted and improved by others who shared his commitment to using business as a tool for community building and social healing. The awards and honorary degrees represented acknowledgement from his peers, but the real validation came from the letters and visits from residents whose lives had been transformed by the opportunities his developments had provided. The economic theories that had emerged from academic study of Tom's methods challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between profit maximization and business success, providing empirical evidence that enterprises focused on stakeholder welfare could achieve superior long-term results compared to those that prioritized shareholder returns above all other considerations. The case studies and research papers that analyzed his projects had become required reading in business schools and urban planning programs, influencing a new generation of professionals who were learning to think differently about the role of commerce in society. The personal relationships that Tom had maintained with residents of his various communities provided ongoing sources of joy and inspiration that reminded him daily of why his work mattered in ways that transcended any financial calculations or professional recognition. The children who had grown up in his developments and were now raising families of their own, the elderly residents who had found security and dignity in homes they could afford, the young couples who had been able to pursue their dreams because affordable housing had freed them from the burden of excessive rent payments. These relationships represented the true measure of his achievements. The correspondence that flowed steadily to his office from around the world brought news of innovations and adaptations that others had developed based on his pioneering work, creating a global community of practice that continued to evolve and improve the methods he had originated. The network of practitioners who gathered annually to share experiences and develop new approaches had become a movement that was transforming understanding of how development could serve human needs while protecting environmental resources. The environmental legacy that Tom's projects had created was perhaps as significant as their social and economic impacts, demonstrating that human communities could enhance rather than degrade the natural systems that supported them when they were designed according to principles of integration and stewardship, rather than domination and exploitation. The islands and mainland developments that bore his influence had become models for sustainable living that attracted researchers and visitors from around the world who were seeking practical examples of how modern life could be conducted within ecological limits. The conservation efforts that had emerged naturally from his community development work reflected his deep appreciation for the natural world and his understanding that human welfare was ultimately dependent on maintaining healthy ecosystems that provided the clean air, water, and soil that made life possible. His projects consistently incorporated the most advanced techniques for renewable energy generation, water conservation, waste reduction, and habitat preservation, proving that environmental responsibility and modern convenience could be harmoniously combined. The cultural contributions that Tom's communities had made to the broader regions where they were located extended far beyond their immediate economic impacts to encompass the kind of social innovation and creative expression that flourished when people felt secure enough to pursue their passions and talents. The art studios and music venues, craft workshops, and educational centers that had emerged organically within his developments had become regional resources that enriched the lives of residents and visitors alike. The educational initiatives that Tom had supported throughout his career reflected his conviction that sustainable communities required citizens who possessed both practical skills and ethical foundations, individuals capable of maintaining and improving the systems that made community life possible while preserving the values and relationships that gave such life meaning and purpose. The scholarships and training programs he had established had enabled countless young people to pursue education and career development opportunities that might otherwise have remained beyond their reach. The intergenerational planning that informed all of Tom's major decisions reflected his understanding that true success could only be measured across lifespans and generations, that the structures and systems he created needed to serve not only current residents but their children and grandchildren who would inherit the consequences of choices made today. His developments were designed to remain viable and attractive across decades of change, with infrastructure and governance systems that could adapt to evolving circumstances while maintaining their essential character and values. The philosophical framework that had emerged from Tom's decades of experience in community development represented a comprehensive vision of how business could serve as a force for social healing and environmental restoration when it was conducted according to principles that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term profit, collaborative relationships over competitive advantage, and collective welfare over individual accumulation. The quiet satisfaction that filled Tom's heart as he contemplated the legacy he was leaving was not the satisfaction of wealth accumulated or recognition achieved, but the deeper contentment that comes from a life spent in meaningful service to others, from work that had made genuine differences in countless individual lives, while contributing to broader understanding of how communities could be organized to promote human flourishing within environmental limits. The wisdom that Tom had gained through his journey from village childhood, through urban disillusionment, to mature understanding of what truly mattered in life, was wisdom that could only be earned through experience, through the kind of mistakes and recoveries that taught lessons no classroom could provide about the difference between success that felt hollow and achievement that brought lasting satisfaction. As the sun set over the various communities that bore the imprint of his vision and care, as lights began to appear in windows where families were gathering for evening meals and quiet conversations, Tom Nook felt the profound peace that comes to individuals who have discovered their true calling and devoted their lives to fulfilling it with integrity, compassion, and unwavering commitment to the simple but revolutionary idea that business success and human welfare were not competing objectives, but complementary aspects of work that served authentic needs while honoring the dignity and potential of every person it touched. The rhythm of seasonal change that had always marked the passage of time in Tom Nook's world continued its eternal dance with the same gentle certainty that had comforted him throughout his childhood in the village. Yet now, each turning of the calendar brought not just the familiar patterns of weather and wildlife, but the arrival of new faces filled with hopes and dreams that mirrored his own youthful aspirations from decades past. The boats and seaplanes that carried fresh groups of prospective residents to his island developments seemed to bring with them an endless supply of human stories, each one unique in its details, yet united by the common thread of individuals seeking something better than what conventional society had offered them. The intake interviews that Tom conducted with potential residents had evolved over the years from simple financial assessments to something approaching pastoral counseling, as he learned to recognize the deeper needs and motivations that lay beneath surface requests for housing and community membership. The young couples who arrived with dreams of raising children in safe, nurturing environments often carried with them the scars of their own difficult childhoods. In urban settings where community had been replaced by anonymity and mutual support had given way to competitive individualism, the single individuals who sought refuge in his communities frequently brought stories of burnout and disillusionment, with career paths that had promised fulfillment but delivered only stress and spiritual emptiness, their faces brightening as Tom described the possibilities for meaningful work and genuine relationships that awaited those willing to embrace different definitions of success and prosperity. The retirees who inquired about island living spoke wistfully of decades spent accumulating wealth and status, only to discover in their later years that neither provided the satisfaction they had expected from a lifetime of dedicated effort. Each new resident who joined one of Tom's communities brought not only their personal aspirations and challenges, but also skills, talents, and perspectives that enriched the collective life of their new neighbors, creating a continuous process of cultural evolution and creative cross-pollination that kept these intentional communities vibrant and dynamic rather than stagnant or insular. The organic growth that characterized successful developments reflected Tom's understanding that healthy communities were living organisms that needed fresh inputs of energy and ideas to remain vital and adaptive. The orientation programs that welcomed newcomers to island life had been refined through years of experience with the practical and emotional challenges that accompanied such dramatic lifestyle changes, providing comprehensive support for everything from learning sustainable living practices to navigating the social dynamics of close-knit communities where privacy and cooperation needed to be carefully balanced. The mentorship networks that paired experienced residents with recent arrivals ensured that institutional knowledge was preserved and transmitted, while new perspectives were integrated into existing community cultures. The success stories that emerged from these careful integration processes provided ongoing validation for Tom's conviction that people possessed far greater capacity for growth and adaptation than conventional society typically allowed them to express, that given supportive environments and genuine opportunities, individuals could transform themselves in ways that seemed impossible within the constraints of their previous circumstances. The former executives who discovered talents for organic farming, the stressed professionals who found peace in traditional crafts, the isolated urbanites who became beloved community organizers, all represented evidence that human potential was far more flexible and resilient than most people realized. The challenges that inevitably arose when diverse groups of people attempted to create harmonious communities were addressed through conflict resolution systems that emphasized understanding and collaboration rather than punishment and exclusion, reflecting Tom's hard-won wisdom about the difference between maintaining order through fear and fostering cooperation through mutual respect. The mediation techniques he had developed drew upon his own experiences of disappointment and forgiveness to help community members navigate disagreements in ways that strengthened rather than damaged their relationships. The seasonal rhythms that governed life in Tom's communities created natural opportunities for reflection and renewal that helped residents maintain perspective on their long-term goals while appreciating the daily pleasures and satisfactions that sustainable living could provide. The spring planting ceremonies that brought everyone together to plan community gardens, the summer festivals that celebrated the abundance of local harvests, the autumn preparations for winter's contemplative months, and the winter gatherings that fostered deeper connections through shared stories and collaborative projects, all contributed to cycles of activity and rest that honored both human needs and natural patterns. The economic sustainability of these communities continued to evolve as residents developed increasingly sophisticated approaches to balancing individual autonomy with collective responsibility, creating local currencies and resource-sharing systems that reduce dependence on external markets while maintaining connections to broader economic networks. The cottage industries and small businesses that flourished within the communities provided both income opportunities for residents and valuable goods and services for their neighbors, demonstrating that economic activity could enhance rather than undermine community cohesion when it was conducted according to appropriate principles and scales. The environmental stewardship that had been built into the fundamental design of Tom's developments produced measurable benefits that extended far beyond the boundaries of individual communities to contribute to regional ecosystem, health and climate stability. The renewable energy systems, water conservation practices, organic agriculture methods, and habitat restoration projects that characterize these communities had become models for sustainable development that attracted researchers and policymakers, seeking practical examples of how human settlements could support rather than degrade environmental systems. The educational opportunities that emerged naturally from community life provided both formal and informal learning experiences that prepared residents to contribute meaningfully to their chosen communities while developing skills and knowledge that enhanced their personal fulfillment and professional capabilities. The workshops and classes that covered everything from traditional crafts and sustainable technologies to conflict resolution and community governance created environments where teaching and learning were reciprocal processes that benefited everyone involved, regardless of their official roles as instructors or students. The cultural expressions that flourished in these supportive environments reflected the diverse backgrounds and creative talents of residents who felt free to explore artistic pursuits and cultural traditions that might have been suppressed or neglected in more competitive or commercially oriented settings. The music and visual arts, storytelling traditions, and culinary innovations that emerged from community life enriched the experiences of residents while creating distinctive local cultures that attracted visitors and contributed to regional cultural diversity. The governance structures that guided community decision-making continued to evolve as residents gained experience in democratic participation and collaborative problem-solving, developing increasingly sophisticated approaches to balancing individual rights with collective needs, while maintaining the flexibility necessary to adapt to changing circumstances and priorities. The consensus-building processes and dispute resolution mechanisms that characterize these systems provided models for participatory democracy that could be adapted to other contexts and scales of organization. The intergenerational relationships that developed naturally within these communities created opportunities for knowledge, transmission, and mutual support that had been largely lost in conventional society's segregation of age groups and its emphasis on nuclear families isolated from extended community networks. The grandparent-like relationships that formed between older and younger residents, the mentorship opportunities that connected experienced community members with newcomers, and the collaborative projects that brought together people of different ages and backgrounds, all contributed to social fabrics that were both resilient and nurturing. The health and wellness benefits that residents experienced through community living reflected not only the physical advantages of clean environments and active lifestyles, but the psychological and spiritual benefits of belonging to supportive social networks where individual worth was recognized and mutual care was practiced as a matter of course rather than as exceptional charity. The reduced stress levels, improved mental health indicators, and enhanced life satisfaction that characterized community residents provided evidence that human well-being was fundamentally social in nature and flourished best in environments where cooperation and mutual support were the norm rather than the exception. The innovations that continued to emerge from these living laboratories of sustainable community development contributed to growing understanding of how human settlements could be designed and managed to promote both individual flourishing and collective well-being, while minimizing environmental impact and resource consumption. The techniques and technologies, social systems and governance structures that proved successful in Tom's communities were adapted and implemented by other developers and planners, seeking to create similar opportunities for sustainable living in different geographical and cultural contexts. The legacy planning that occupied increasing amounts of Tom's attention as he contemplated the eventual transition of leadership responsibilities to younger generations reflected his commitment to ensuring that the principles and practices he had spent decades developing would continue to guide community development long after his personal involvement ended. The training programs and documentation systems he established were designed to preserve institutional knowledge while encouraging continued innovation and adaptation to meet evolving challenges and opportunities. The personal satisfaction that Tom derived from witnessing the continuous cycle of new arrivals, successful integrations, and thriving community life was the satisfaction of work that had found its true purpose and achieved its intended effects, creating sustainable systems that could perpetuate their benefits across generations while adapting to changing circumstances and needs. The communities he had helped create had become self-generating sources of opportunity and support that would continue to serve human needs long after their founder was no longer available to provide personal guidance and oversight. The wisdom that Tom had accumulated through decades of community building and relationship development was wisdom that could only be shared through example and patient mentoring, through the kind of lived demonstration that showed rather than merely described how business could serve community needs while remaining financially viable, how individual success could enhance rather than undermine collective well-being, how human settlements could exist in harmony with natural systems, while providing all the amenities and opportunities necessary for lives of dignity and fulfillment. The continuing story that unfolded with each new day in the communities Tom had helped create was a story without ending, a narrative that would continue to evolve and grow as long as people sought alternatives to conventional approaches to living and working, as long as individuals were willing to take risks and make sacrifices for the possibility of creating something better than what they had inherited from previous generations. As long as the human capacity for cooperation and mutual care continued to assert itself against the forces of division and exploitation that too often dominated social and economic relationships. As evening settled over the various islands and mainland developments that bore the imprint of Tom's vision and dedication, as residents gathered for communal meals and planning meetings, as children played in safe neighborhoods while their parents pursued meaningful work and built lasting friendships, the quiet satisfaction that filled his heart was the satisfaction of dreams, realized not just for himself, but for countless others who had found in his communities the opportunities they needed to build lives of purpose and connection, to raise families in environments that nurtured their best qualities, to grow old with dignity and security while contributing their accumulated wisdom to the continued flourishing of the communities they had chosen to call home. The gentle twilight that settled over Tom Nook's world each evening brought with it a sense of completion that was both daily and eternal, the satisfaction of another day's work contributing to the endless project of creating spaces where people could discover their truest selves and build lives that honored both their individual aspirations and their responsibilities to the communities that sustained them. The lights that began to appear in windows across the various settlements he had helped bring into being represented more than mere illumination against the gathering darkness. They were beacons of hope that testified to the enduring human capacity for cooperation and mutual care, evidence that alternatives to exploitation and competition were not only possible, but could flourish when they were nurtured with patience and wisdom. The correspondence that continued to flow steadily to his office brought news from residents whose lives had been transformed by the opportunities his communities provided. Their letters filled with updates about children who were growing up in environments where safety and creativity were taken for granted, about careers that had found new directions when freed from the constraints of conventional urban environments, about relationships that had deepened and flourished in settings where people had time and space to appreciate each other's unique qualities and contributions. The photographs that accompanied these letters painted pictures of lives well lived, of gardens that produced both food and beauty, of workshops where traditional crafts were preserved and passed on to new generations, of gathering spaces where neighbors had become friends and friends had become chosen family members, whose bonds transcended the accidents of birth or circumstance that had originally brought them together. These images served as constant reminders of what was possible when communities were designed to support human flourishing rather than merely accommodate human existence. The visitors who continued to seek Tom's guidance and consultation represented a growing network of individuals and organizations committed to demonstrating that development could serve human needs while protecting environmental imbedale resources, that business could be conducted according to principles that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term profit, that communities could be organized to encourage cooperation and mutual support rather than competition and isolation. The conferences and workshops where Tom shared his experiences had become gathering places for practitioners from around the world who were experimenting with similar approaches in their own contexts, creating a global community of practice that continued to evolve and refine the methods he had pioneered. The case studies and research papers that emerged from these collaborations provided empirical evidence that alternatives to conventional development practices were not only viable, but often superior in their long-term outcomes for both human communities and environmental systems. The academic recognition that Tom's work had received from universities and research institutions, while personally gratifying, was less important to him than the practical applications that emerged as his innovations were adapted and implemented in diverse geographical and cultural settings. The principles that had guided his village store and island developments proved remarkably transferable to other contexts, demonstrating that the fundamental human needs for security, community, and meaningful work were universal, even when their specific expressions varied according to local conditions and cultural traditions. The policy recommendations that emerged from study of Tom's methods had begun to influence government approaches to housing and community development, with officials at various levels recognizing that public investment in community-centered development could produce better outcomes at lower costs than conventional approaches that treated housing as a commodity rather than a human right. The pilot programs and demonstration projects that incorporated his innovations were providing evidence that public policy could support rather than hinder the kind of community development that enhanced both individual welfare and collective well-being. The environmental impact studies that documented the ecological benefits of Tom's sustainable development practices had contributed to growing recognition that human settlements could actually enhance, rather than degrade, the natural systems that supported them when they were designed according to principles of integration and stewardship. The renewable energy systems, water conservation practices, organic agriculture methods, and habitat restoration projects that characterized his communities had become models for development that worked with rather than against natural processes. The economic analyses that examined the financial performance of Tom's various enterprises had confounded critics who had predicted that his idealistic approaches would prove unsustainable in competitive markets, providing clear evidence that businesses operated according to principles of fairness and mutual benefit could not only survive but thrive, while creating lasting value for all stakeholders rather than merely concentrating wealth in the hands of ownership. The social impact assessments that measured the effects of his communities on individual and collective well-being had documented improvements in everything from physical health and mental wellness to educational achievement and civic engagement, demonstrating that the benefits of sustainable community development extended far beyond simple housing provision to encompass comprehensive improvements in quality of life for residents and surrounding regions. The intergenerational perspective that informed all of Tom's planning decisions reflected his understanding that true success could only be measured across lifespans and generations, that the structures and systems he created needed to serve not only current residents but their children and grandchildren, who would inherit the consequences of choices made today. His developments were designed to remain viable and attractive across decades of change, with infrastructure and governance systems that could adapt to evolving circumstances while maintaining their essential character and values. The mentorship networks that had emerged naturally within his communities created opportunities for knowledge, transmission, and skill development that benefited both experienced residents who found fulfillment in teaching and newcomers who gained practical abilities while forming meaningful relationships with their neighbors. These informal educational systems had proven more effective than formal training programs in preparing people for the kind of collaborative living that made intentional communities successful and sustainable. The cultural preservation efforts that had developed organically within Tom's communities reflected residents' appreciation for traditions and practices that might be lost in more commercially oriented environments, with workshops and festivals that celebrated everything from traditional crafts and musical forms to seasonal celebrations and storytelling traditions that connected present communities with their historical and cultural roots. The technological innovations that emerged from the practical challenges of sustainable community living had contributed to broader understanding of how modern conveniences and environmental responsibility could be harmoniously combined with renewable energy systems, water recycling technologies, and communication networks that enabled residents to maintain connections with global communities while minimizing their ecological footprint. The spiritual dimensions of community life that had developed naturally in environments where people felt safe enough to explore questions of meaning and purpose had created spaces for contemplation and growth that nourished residents' inner lives while strengthening their connections to each other and to the natural world that supported their shared existence. The meditation gardens and quiet spaces, the community libraries and discussion groups that characterized these developments provided opportunities for the kind of reflection and dialogue that were often impossible in more hurried and competitive environments. The healing that had occurred for countless individuals who had found refuge in Tom's communities from the wounds inflicted by urban isolation, economic insecurity, and social disconnection represented perhaps his most significant achievement, demonstrating that environments designed according to principles of care and mutual support could help people recover from trauma and rediscover their capacity for trust, creativity, and joy. The quiet pride that Tom felt as he contemplated the legacy he was leaving was not the pride of personal achievement, but the deeper satisfaction that comes from work that has served purposes larger than individual advancement, from contributions to human understanding and welfare that would continue to generate benefits long after his personal involvement ended, from participation in the ancient and ongoing project of creating conditions where all people could flourish according to their highest potentials. The wisdom that he hoped to pass on to future generations of community developers and business leaders was not technical knowledge that could be reduced to formulas and procedures, but the kind of practical wisdom that could only be gained through experience, through the patient work of building relationships and solving problems, through the courage to trust in human goodness, even when experience had provided reasons for cynicism and doubt. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky above the various communities that bore the imprint of his vision and care, as residents settled into evening routines that reflected the kind of security and contentment that he had spent his lifetime trying to create for others, Tom Nook felt the profound peace that comes to individuals who have discovered their true calling and devoted their lives to fulfilling it with integrity, compassion, and unwavering commitment to the revolutionary idea that human welfare and business success were not competing objectives, but complementary aspects of work that served authentic needs while honoring the dignity and unlimited potential that resided within every person it touched, every community it served, every future it helped to make possible through the patient accumulation of small kindnesses and practical solutions that proved, day after day and year after year, that the world could indeed be made better through the simple but profound commitment to treating others with the care and consideration that every living being deserved.